I am John Seroka with Seroka Brand Development and also the Mortgage Technology and Marketing Committee Chair. And welcome to our webinar today, Managing Marketing Technology Through API Architecture. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that less than 5% of lenders have an actual API strategy? If you're going to be part of the digital mortgage revolution, which you must be in order to be sustainable, having an API strategy needs to become a priority. So today, we're going to discuss the API challenge, state of API's ecosphere in the mortgage industry, the difference between system, process, and experience APIs, the API architecture best practices, and we'll also see use case examples and examples of mortgage software vendor APIs. So with us today, I am thrilled to present to you three industry experts. Gina Torvik, the marketing manager at Broadview Mortgage Corporation, Brent Emler, the EVP of sales and marketing at Velma, and Mike O'Meara, the SVP of operations at Infoview Systems. By way of some background, this webinar is a production of the Mortgage Technology and Marketing Committee. The committee was formed to support the development and dissemination of new technologies and marketing strategies that the mortgage industry needs to embrace. So as we go through this, please submit your questions and I will direct them to the right individual as they come up. Or you can wait until the Q&A time at the end. With that, over to you, Gina.
Thank you, John, very much for that introduction, and thank you all for being on this call today. I am going to be introducing what the API discussion is. All right. All my fellow marketers on the call, we all have our own technology platform, and we all integrate them a little bit differently. As an example, I have on the screen here different technology platforms, and as we get more and more vendors, we keep adding. We are in really a vendor landscape in this whole digital mortgage era. Our LOS, our loan origination system, needs to be in the middle, and it needs to talk and communicate to all our various vendors to really have an integrated, seamless process, both for internally and externally. It just makes everybody's life easier, to be honest. But it is a lot of technology to manage. So having a crucial API strategy in place is where the industry is going. I'm going to show two different examples of what we use at Broadview Mortgage for our current data flow. As I show them, start thinking about your own data flow processes, seeing how they currently integrate, and maybe even think how they could be more streamlined. The first one up here is our general marketing data flow. My fellow marketers, this will probably look pretty familiar to what you have structured, but we do have our own little different nuances here. So as I go through this, think about your own platforms. To highlight this, a best case example is, let's say we have a young couple, they're getting their first house and they are ecstatic. So they meet with their local loan officer and they get their information started in the front end LOS system. As they progress through the transaction, as they get closer to underwriting and funding, we push that data to our back end operations system. As the loan progresses even further and they're getting to that final loan has funded stage, once that date is entered into that system, it triggers out various different automated processes through our API to trigger the next couple data spheres. So you can see here the four spheres I have on the right represent the four different technology platforms. The first one is our status emails. Once it sees that a date has been entered into the loan origination system, it triggers out an email that says, you know what, your loan has funded, congratulations. It goes to both borrower and co-borrower, so they both open it up, they see it, they're notified. As well, it triggers our post-close emails. Within the system, we have their birthday emails in there. We have other dates such as the loan anniversary emails, so we can start triggering emails off these statuses in our system. The second sphere are automated surveys. Again, it's looking for a specific field, in this case, the loan funded date, and it triggers to send out the automatic survey. The last two spheres, the mobile app and marketing reports, go along the same idea as triggering off data entered the system and it causes an action to happen. Mobile app, it sends the status updates as they progress through the loan. And marketers, we have to have our reports from somewhere. It's pulling the data from the system. So I think this slide is pretty relatable to some of our marketers and lenders on the call. So I actually wanted to show a second example to highlight another different type of API strategy. All right, this one, you have the spheres again, which represent the different technology platforms, and then the arrows, which represent the data flow. The blue circle in the center is our credit monitoring system. It's almost a central hub of some information. So we're pulling in data from the three spheres on the left. So let's say that same couple, a couple years down the line, they're looking to get a refinance. They get their mortgage credit, they get their credit checked, and we get alerted because we have an API with the credit bureau data. We have an API with Optimal Blue, our pricing engine, and then the remaining sphere from prior, the LOS system. That API sends the data into this credit monitoring system. It crunches numbers, it calculates scenarios just based on how it's set up. And then we push it through another API, which is a PDF letter generator, which then triggers additional steps going down the line to send out an email of a firm offer of credit, as well as put a copy in box for our record retention. Now, these two examples just showcase of API strategy of how data can flow through your various processes. So laying that foundation, and now maybe you're starting to think of how your own data is flowing, let's really get into starting the API discussion. We all have our own constraints and budgetary needs and, company size. So we all need to start our talks of what systems are crucial for APIs to have versus what's nice to have. What are those really integral pieces you need for integration? Because going back to that first slide, there is a lot of vendors, and every time you add a new one, you don't want to be re-architecturing your entire system again. So the strategy questions you want to start asking yourself as we go through the technical aspects later on in this presentation is, what current budget is available to really streamline some of these processes? Does it fit with your current company size, and does it fit with your current strategic goals? So the last point I want to make is, API strategy, is it a priority currently, or are you okay with the status quo? So we're going to pass it on over to Brent, who is going to talk about where APIs are in the current mortgage industry, and we'll see how it's impacting everyone's businesses. So over to you, Brent.
Thank you, Gina. Fantastic examples. So just let me go ahead and change the slide. And the next slide, if you could give me the controls, that'd be great. The next slide is really talking about the state of APIs in the mortgage industry. And if you think about the first slide that Gina showed, there are a lot of vendors in the mortgage space. It's really incredible. There are dozens and dozens, and many lenders, organizations, dozens of vendors that you have to, it's sort of this orchestration of data from a variety of different places. But the mortgage industry is moving to a digital world, finally, sort of, right? Everybody's sort of saying, wow, we're finally moving into, it's 2018, and we're starting to now invest in technology. And a lot of that is driven by the ever-increasing cost to originate a transaction, and how do we drive those costs down? And the way we're going to do that is, as an industry, is we're going to use technology to eliminate inefficiencies and create better workflows. A great example of the investment that vendors in the mortgage space are making in APIs, my favorite example is Optimal Blue. When Optimal Blue was acquired I think it was about a year and a half ago, the first thing that Scott Happ, the incoming CEO, did, that the number one objective for Scott and the new Optimal Blue team was to move their entire platform to an API framework. Now, the Optimal Blue acquisition, I believe this is public information, it's $300 million, and they've got this massive development team, and they could have done a million different things with all of those resources. But what did they do? They focused all of their attention on building out their API framework. And the reason for that is Optimal Blue really views themselves, at least from our perspective, they view themselves as a content, just an incredibly rich content library of product and pricing. And what they want to do is they want to proliferate that content everywhere throughout the industry, and that means they want their content to be leveraged by vendors like Velma CRM. They want the content to be leveraged by Broadview Mortgage. They want their content to be everywhere, and that's their strategy. And so they built out their API framework. Another example is, for those of you who went to the Ellie Mae Experience event last year, you know that a large part of that event was centered around their move from the old SDK framework to the new API framework. And they're putting incredible amount of resources into moving from that old software development kit or SDK that many of you are probably familiar with to the new API framework. And they've created the Developer Connect, where developers, Ellie Mae developers can go in and pick up APIs and use them in a variety of different places. So if we can go to the next slide. The next slide is really just another illustration of what is going on in the industry. Fannie Mae, they're coming out with a whole new set of APIs designed to modernize the mortgage lending industry. This is all part of the digital transformation and digital mortgage that we all want to participate in. So there is clearly a huge investment by the vendors in the space. And I know from our company's perspective, Velma is a marketing application provider specifically for the mortgage industry, and we have a CRM, and we've been around since 2007. And in 2014, right around 2014, we saw the writing on the wall that the industry was moving towards this digital mortgage, digital transformation kind of space. And so we said, let's rebuild our entire application using APIs. And it's really exciting what can be done with that. So we can go to the next slide. We're going to get into some more technical things with Mike O'Mara, Mike's company is an API architect firm. They're a consulting firm, and they will move your organization. They can move organizations from what you're seeing on the screen to an API strategy. And Mike's going to talk about the different types of API structures and platforms. So when John opened the webinar, he said, roughly 5% of mortgage lenders have an actual API strategy. And what he meant by that was not that only 5% of lenders are using APIs, not at all. Almost everybody is using an API in one way or another, but almost everyone is doing it in this way. And what this is illustrating is point-to-point integrations. It's an integration or API application. So it's, for example, it's an integration of the LOS and the CRM. So the CRM is getting data from the LOS or posting data to the LOS using their respective APIs. That is a point-to-point integration. Same thing with your product and pricing engine and your LOS. That is a point-to-point integration. And we have got to get away from using point-to-point integrations. Otherwise, your organization looks like this. This is probably what your many organizations look like today. You just don't see it. We've got to move to an API strategy, an API framework, and using API platforms. So on the next slide, what we want to talk about is, and I'm going to hand this off to you, Mike. You and I can kind of go back and forth on these. Mike is going to talk about the difference between a system API, a process API, and an experience API. So we're really going to get into the meat of this webinar now. And so Mike's going to give us a high-level description of what these are, and then we're going to show some examples of what those system APIs look like in the mortgage space. So, Mike, can you just kind of talk us through what a system, process, and experience API is?
Absolutely. So, as Brent mentioned, point-to-point integrations in the tech world, we call them P2P. Essentially, it's an integration between two systems or endpoints. They're very tightly coupled, and it's strictly between endpoint A and B, right? And the difference here is that you are, as the integrations grow within your organization, this point-to-point integration approach looks like the previous spaghetti slide that we just saw. And unfortunately, over time, your IT department will become a bottleneck, or worse, the blocker for your company to deliver services, both internally and externally to your customers. So hence this API-led connectivity approach provides the framework for the IT department to be agile and responsive to the business needs of the company. So this is what it looks like. And at a very high level, this system API layer is kind of your foundation. It is the foundation, the bottom tier that doesn't change much, changes very infrequently. It provides access to much of your sensitive information within your organization. Then we have this process tier. And here's where the agility and the new value creation for the business occurs. These process APIs define the business logic for a given process, really made up of a bunch of microservices and things of that nature that can be composed together for different processes. And then on the very top, we have this experience API layer. And they're typically very lightweight. And the biggest benefit of leveraging the experience APIs is the speed at which they can be delivered. So that's kind of the high-level view of that. And if we go over to the next slide, and this is an example of a successful API structure that that Brent will speak to, and I'll add a few words in there as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. And keep me honest. As you know, I'm a sales guy, and I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, so I think I'm a developer, but I'm actually not. So just keep me honest.
Right.
Yeah. So a system API, and I can kind of speak to some examples that we have here at Velma. A system API is really, as Mike said, your foundational APIs. And so if you think about the LOS, I'll go from right to left. If you think about the LOS, they've got a stack of APIs, and one of those system APIs, and it's really straightforward, right? It's post a contact and loan data to our system. We're a loan origination software. We want people to be able to post data to us. And so that might be your CRM can post data, and by post, what I mean is push in. So what happens is the CRM goes to the loan origination software, knocks on the door and says, hi, let's say Encompass, I'm a CRM. I'd like to put some information into your system. Here are my credentials to prove I am who I say I am. And then the LOS opens the door and the CRM walks in and drops off the contact and loan data. So it's a very basic post-contact and loan data. And then conversely, it might be get contact and loan data. So as a CRM, Velma would go knock on the door again of the LOS and say, LOS, I would like to get all the contacts that have had a milestone changed in the last 5 minutes. And the LOS would say, who are you? We provide the credentials. They let us in. We get the information and post it into our system. Okay, so those are system APIs. They are the foundation of an API strategy. Another example with Velma is create order. So we have an API where we've got information in our system and we want to create an email order or a print order, or perhaps we have a system API that is create a document. In the product and pricing engine, you may have a call or an API that says, pricing engine, I've got this information. It's a $300,000 loan in Idaho, and the borrower has this FICO score. Here's the information. Knock on the door. Can we come in? Yes. I need to get the product and pricing options for that particular scenario because I want to do some other things with it. And that's where the process APIs come in. Right, so the process APIs is, and this is the way I understand it, it's really a gang of APIs. It's a number of APIs working in concert with each other to deliver a result. And so an example of that would be a contact import API. That's a process API, and that would couple together Velma's APIs, a number of system APIs from Velma, and some system APIs from the LOS, and gang them together to create a singular API where someone within the organization, like a Gina in the marketing department, or perhaps somebody in the business intelligence group, can come in, pick up that process API, and not have to recreate the wheel every single time to get the same job done. So that's what a process API is. And then finally, the experience API is taking those multiple process APIs and ganging those together to create an experience that can be used in Velma.com CRM or anyvendor.com, or Gina may say in the marketing department, we're going to build our own mobile application and we want to use process APIs to do that very quickly. And I think I saw a slide at one time, Mike, if you can check my work on this, but I think a system API is typically, to build a new system API, you're looking at 6 to 12 months. To do a process API, you're looking at 1 to 3 months. And then an experience API, this is where you can deliver big value very quickly to business units. That can happen within 4 to 6 weeks. Does that sound about right, Mike?
Yeah, and it really depends on how you go about doing it, right? So in general terms, yes. And
Yep.
the beauty here, guys, is that with this architectural foundation, the new business requirement is primarily built just using these building blocks, using these existing APIs to gather and compose what you need to have happen, right? The other example we have here in Brent's discussion here is this other vendor, right? So in this experience, over time, you have built your system APIs out, right? And then with integration with Velma, you perhaps created your process APIs to do the integration with Velma, and you build them in such a way that they can be reused. Therefore, when Gina's organization says, hey, we want to kind of do our own flyer, now all you're doing is either using the existing components that you already built for Velma or using portions of them to quickly build, if you need to, the process piece, but then you're really only going into and building out this experience layer. So that's kind of the beauty of it. You build that system layer one time, unless you have some database changes, but it doesn't impact everything else upstream. So that's kind of the beauty of the this architecture. It's gets you to market very quickly using this type of approach. So getting the market quick, address the business needs of the company. It's very agile. You get quick to market, and perhaps you're a market disruptor within the mortgage industry. So
yeah,
that's what this is really.
Yeah,
what
that's exactly right, Mike. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I think on to the next slide.
Yep. So Mike, one of the things that I'm incredibly fascinated by is this idea of this API platform capability that's out there that I think most mortgage lenders don't realize that there's an API platform. What is an API platform? Can you kind of just walk us through what an API platform is, and why people should care about looking into maybe my organization needs an API platform, and maybe my organization needs to start asking vendors, are you part of an API platform, or can you be part of an API platform? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, as Gina mentioned, everything comes down to, what your priorities are, what the funding requirements are, and company size. And there are several vendors out there that provide a platform of some sort. And we happen to do quite a bit of business with companies that use the MuleSoft Anypoint platform. And simply put, it's just an API platform that provides a set of tools. It supports all the aspects of your API architecture, design, development, and the operational side. Some of the key benefits are taking an idea from API build to production. And the theory behind this is, over time, even some of the business folks, because it's all GUI oriented, right? Drag and drop. Even people in the business can actually do some of these functions. And kind of the philosophy is, go quick and fail fast. So you're not spending a lot of time. But it gives you that type of ability to take an idea, build it. If it fails, it fails. You've only spent a couple hours on it. Otherwise, you move it forward. Ultimately, the goal is getting into production. It provides operational insights, these platforms do, such as runtime metrics, your service level agreements, alerting, security as far as access controls and policies, attack prevention, analytics, provides you with dashboards, usage statistics. So if you have, say, 100 APIs out there, you can actually see how often they're being used. Key performance metrics and indicators, and discovery, which is a big part of this. Discovery is the ability to expose your API assets to the organization. And it really helps promote this API reuse. So you're not going out and building something. You're just reusing the assets you currently already spent time and money on to build so that they can be reused. And lastly, an API platform allows companies to leverage this on-prem, we call it on-premise, cloud, or you can do a hybrid approach. Just depends on the organization's desires and needs. Obviously, when it's on an on-prem situation, you have to have staff that manages the on-prem installation. When it's on the cloud, the provider basically manages that for you. And then a hybrid solution is a little combination of both. So that is what an API platform is.
Yeah. It's interesting. I spoke to a sales representative recently at MuleSoft, and he said and they're a big publicly traded company, and he said the number one growth area for him is Silicon Valley, obviously, but more specifically, this was very telling. More specifically, he said fintech, which is financial technology, and even more specifically, he said mortgage. He said 40% of the vendors that he was talking to get onto the MuleSoft platform were in mortgage. So if you think about the state of the mortgage industry and as it relates to APIs, I think that's incredibly telling. Vendors, if there are any vendors on this call, if you don't have an API strategy, in my view, you better get one pretty quick. And we know we've got to do a lot of work here at Velma, and I think most vendors in the mortgage space know that this is the future. A mortgage transaction today, depending on who you ask and how you evaluate it, the cost to originate is something like $7,000 to $8,000 per transaction. That's incredibly high. Margins are going to, because of the raising of the rates going up, margins are starting to get impacted even more. And everybody out there in the mortgage space is going to be really focused on how can I create operational efficiency. I'll be honest, the API platform, it is not a cheap thing. Going with this model, this is not something you're just going to spend a couple $1,000 on and it's going to be world changing. This is a significant investment. But if you look at what you get out of that, the operational efficiency, driving down the cost to originate a transaction, is an absolute no-brainer in our opinion. So if we can go to the next slide, I think just off to the next slide. I'm going to talk about a couple of examples. I'll go through this pretty quickly. A couple of examples of mortgage software vendor APIs. I know ours, so that's why I'm showing ours. Here's an example of an open house flyer solution. So if you look on the right-hand side, this is a copy of an editor that Velma provides to our users, where a loan officer can go in, they can change the body copy of the template, they can add product and pricing information, they can co-brand it, they can email it off to their partner very quickly and very easily. So that's an example of a number of system APIs coupled together to create this open house flyer experience, right? So we've got process APIs. So this is really showing a number of things, right? So it's system APIs, which is call up the editor, is one example. And then there's process APIs, which is when the editor is up and someone's interacting with it, make a call back to AWS, for instance, and save a version of that so that when the loan officer can come back and start where they left off previously. So that in itself is there are probably a couple of dozen API calls right inside of this discrete application, of this discrete experience, right? And I also wanted to show on the left-hand side of the screen, if you click on the button next to the product and pricing in this flyer, we're making calls to Optimal Blue. We're packaging up information that's user input, sending it over to Optimal Blue. They are doing process APIs on their side, returning results to us, and then we're taking those results, putting them into our open house flyer. Now, this open house flyer could, including the Optimal Blue piece, could be extended to another vendor. Let's say there's another CRM vendor in the mortgage space who has their own open house flyer solution, but it's just not their core competency, and they'd really like to have a better one, but they don't want to have to spend the next year developing one. They could come to Velma and they could say, hey, Velma, we understand you've got a great Optimal Blue integrated open house flyer API experience. Can you extend that to us? The answer is yes. We hand them that experience API, and they can quickly install that right into their CRM, or perhaps a mortgage lender wants to do that with their own application. So this is an example. This particular piece is an example of system APIs, process APIs, and then ultimately an experience API. So we can go on to the next slide. There's another example of system process and experience APIs. So Del Mar, maybe many of you know of Del Mar. They are an Ellie Mae partner, and they have been delivering a product called Email It. It's a phenomenally powerful rules engine that allows you to take data from Encompass, package it up, and send emails off to a variety of places. You can send emails to the loan officers, the processors, the realtors, consumers, whoever you want. It's incredibly powerful. The challenge that they have is it's a great product, right? But what they saw in Velma is a partner who could deliver them an experience API that would extend their product significantly. So go to the next screen. Sorry, I should have controls, but I screwed up. So thanks for running the screens there. So this is what the email would look like. This is what the subject line would look like in the Email It platform. Again, incredibly powerful, but text-only emails. So in the next slide, what we're going to see is an example of Del Mar and Email It on that next slide, if you would. Del Mar and Email It, they wanted to be able to provide rich, mobile responsive, highly deliverable, reputation managed emails using their rules engine. And so they came to us and they said, Velma, can you provide us with an experience API where we can show an example of what that HTML piece looks like. We can give someone the ability to edit the document, and we want to have just this really rich email experience right inside of our platform. And we, Del Mar, don't want to have to go build all of that, and we don't want to have to manage the email reputation, the DNS records, and all of those other things. Can you just give us a set of experience APIs that we can quickly plug into our application and enhance it in a significant way? Then the next slide is an example of an editor experience API. So if you wanted to just have an editor in your application, you can just call up one of Velma's experience APIs. So, I hope that gives folks some examples that you can really hang your hat on and understand that there are these basic foundational APIs. Give me hey LOS, give me a contact, and you can do that, and that's what a lot of CRMs and LOSs are doing together, right? They're sharing data back and forth, kind of a point-to-point integration. Then you have these process APIs, which is ganging them together to do. And Mike, you use the term microservices, and I think I love that term. So because it's like this little process that you can just install all over the place. And then even better yet is this experience API, where you can have all of those system APIs, the process APIs, and take all of that and create this really great experience that we can share with each other to deliver a better experience for our customers. So hopefully that gives you guys some really good examples. If we go to the next screen, I think the next screen is kind of the wrap-up slides. We might have some. I think we've got some questions here, but I'll hand it over to you, Gina, and you can kind of talk through some of the takeaways. I know that for me, this has been an incredibly informative process going through building this webinar. I really want to thank Mike. You've really opened my eyes to what's going on in the API world, and Gina, if you could just take it from there, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, and going through this slide deck with the team on the call here, I definitely learned a lot more about APIs as well. So where does that leave us mortgage lenders then? We kind of get an idea of, we are working with APIs. How do we build out more of an API strategy, since a lot of our vendors are going that way? So another takeaways I want to leave with you are questions to ask yourself and then questions to ask your vendors. Internally for yourself, make sure that you have your clear objectives in line. APIs are a way to get there, but you define where there is. It's what you want the APIs to do. So a lot of actually what we've developed internally here at Broadview is it's just up to someone asking a question saying, why can't this pair with this? Or let's try to, get this initiative off the ground. And then as we've worked our way through it, we actually realized an API was a really great solution, and they can offer some really interesting solutions if you kind of just needle with it, think about it. So, but you need to have that end goal in mind. What do you want to streamline? What can you streamline? Do you have the budget in place? Do you have the resources to complete it? And then once you get that framework, you can ask your vendors who you want to integrate with. Do they have an API strategy? Are they open to sharing it with your IT department to start tinkering with it? How well are your APIs documented? These are some of the first steps to take in your API strategy building. And lastly, I want to leave with some recommendations. These were recommendations from the team here on the call of some integration platforms. We showed the example of MuleSoft, as well as we've listed 4 others on there. So feel free to jot those down, get some introductory calls out, and kind of just see if you have that project you've been sitting on and you want to really get at it for this 2018 year, see if APIs can be an interesting solution for you. With that, I'll pass it on back over to the organizers and see if we have any questions coming in.
Great. And Gina, thank you very much. This is John. So, all right. Well, thank you, Gina, Mike, and Brent. Right now, I would like to turn this over to our audience for any questions. Actually, you know what? We're right up at the end of our time here. We only have a couple of minutes left. I did get a couple of questions in over here. And if we could please put up the screen, whoever has controls with everybody's contact information on it, that would be great. Okay, so then anybody here, you can feel free to shoot any one of us an email with any questions that you have, and we'll direct them over to the right people as necessary. But you know, we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and also want to make sure that we do our best to deliver quality content. So I have a favor to ask all of you who joined us today. You'll be receiving a survey probably within the hour. And if you could please take the time to fill that out, let us know what you thought of today's webinar. That would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you have anything that you would like to learn about in future webinars, please let us know that as well. And we'll real quickly here, since we have a minute left, I have one question here, which is, what rough budget should I expect to implement an API strategy? Brent, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, you know, that's a tough one to answer. Basically, when we have discussions with a company's business and IT stakeholders, our goal is to first understand their pain points and the current application landscape. We then go ahead and align the future state with the business vision and obviously the business budget considerations, and we develop a roadmap. And the API strategy typically evolves over time. So it's not a big bang approach. So you provide value to the business each step of the way. And as Gina mentioned, again, it's, you know, much depends on the budget, company size, and, you know, the strategic goals as well. But that's a tough one. But it's a iterative process, but providing value all the way along the way.
Well, I would weigh in and say when a loan costs $7,000 to $8,000 to originate, not very much.
Right on.
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We're at the end of our time frame right now, and again, look forward to getting the responses to the surveys and seeing you next time. Bye now.